Hey everybody, this is Perch. I want to confess something. I've been asked about this topic, I think, off and on for almost 2 years now, and I've always screwed it up. I've been asked about this in the comic shop many times and on Twitter, and I don't even know where to begin. And I've always been very intimidated about where to begin, and that holds true even today. I have great reservations about doing this video because I'm not going to do it well. So right out the gate, I just want to admit that and say that well, in theory, I want to point you to some other people, but the reality is nobody's really done this well. And that's talk about Steve Ditko and Mr. A and kind of what went on with Steve Ditko. A lot of people will tell you kind of their version of, well, Steve Ditko is a pretty withdrawn person. That's true, sort of. It is true that he was pretty isolated. There's a lot of kind of crazy Steve Ditko stories out there that lots of people will tell you, but I always feel like these stories give you like one slice of somebody's life. It would be like if somebody was describing you, the person listening to this, and they were doing so by taking 15 minutes out of your day and using that to define kind of your whole personality. I think Steve Ditko is a really hard guy to kind of nail down. And he, there's just a lot of back and forth with him. So Steve Ditko, and this isn't meant to be a full analysis of him, but he was somebody who came into comics when he came out of the army. And I think by the mid-50s, he was doing comics, I believe with Stan Lee. And he drew a lot of horror, a lot of sci-fi stuff, really because his job was with Atlas, and his style was dynamic. He was the best. Again, I'm going to give you these little bits and recognize I'm doing a poor job, but I think one of the things he did very well is he would draw characters that looked vulnerable. So when he was doing stuff with monsters and with robots and with kind of other things crashing around, the characters looked like there was danger, that they were in trouble. And his art looked different. Unlike a lot of places where the main characters or even the supporting characters looked kind of like, idealized versions of themselves, Ditko's stuff always looked like the characters were, I don't want to say more like you or me, but they would show expression. They would show startled fear. And in fact, one of his most famous is this image of Spider-Man being crushed that we've seen reprinted in a bunch of places. One of the reasons it works is it looks like Spider-Man might get crushed. It looks like he is in some trouble. And if you compare him to Jack Kirby, and I love Jack Kirby as well, but Jack Kirby would draw these fantastical God-like images and really kind of crazy sci-fi everywhere. And Ditko would draw things that were more, certainly plenty of fantastical elements, but the heroes or the characters within them always look like they were in some level of danger. It's very much you really get the sense, whereas in Kirby's world, it looked like everything was huge and expansive, and these gods and goddesses were interacting with it. With Ditko, it looked like a human faced with this bigger than life reality, this world that was far beyond them. I don't know if that makes any sense, but there was a different tone to kind of what he produced. And I think that's why in many cases, Ditko, although I don't think he's really credited with this at Marvel, but if you look at a lot of kind of the costumes he created, especially the iconic stuff like with Spider-Man and with Iron Man and others, the Ditko versions are more of what stuck with the movies and longer term. And it's what got Marvel into that, the world outside your window, that they were a little bit more realistic, a little bit more relatable. Even though there were gods and superheroes and people flying around, there was still an element of these people, you could kind of picture them living in our world. Whereas with Kirby, it was always this more super fantastical world, maybe more built to kind of the new gods or to Thor or some of these kinds of characters. It was just a slight difference between them. But if you look at how Marvel kind of hung their hat on being a little bit more realistic, I think a lot of that is due to Ditko. I think Ditko did a lot of that. Now, There's been a lot of stories over the time about what got him angry at Stan Lee, and there's a bunch of stories that Ditko got too big a head, and that he believed he was, he was responsible for Spider-Man. And then there's this story that a lot of people really believe is true, that Ditko and Stan Lee quarreled over the identity of the Green Goblin, and that it was really, that was what caused them to break apart. However, a bunch of people have looked into this, and it doesn't really hold up, both in the history of kind of what was going on, and also to some stories where he talks about about what his plans in the comics were. He's given interviews that really dispute that story. Yet a lot of people really believe that that's true, and it seems it seems odd, and it doesn't really fit with what was going on in the comics. But that became the reason why he left. Of course, he went over to DC, and he did other things. But the part that gets people, I would say, really kind of hooked on him, or not hooked, but what a lot of people misunderstand is that at one point in I believe the early 70s, although it may have been a little earlier than that, Steve Ditko creates this character called Mr. A. And Mr. A was a weird comic. I think I could say it. It was a weird comic. There's no real way around it. It was a creator-owned character, and it was I won't say anti-hero, because what's weird, what's strange about it is Steve Ditko really believed this character was a hero. This was a big kind of hero character. And the whole thing was really wrapped up in objectivism. And objectivism is, I don't even know how to explain that in 30 seconds. I'm sure there's some YouTube videos you can, but this is, certainly was touched on with Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. The definition that you see on the internet is objectivism is a philosophy of rational individualism founded by Ayn Rand, where it holds that there's no greater moral goal than achieving one's happiness. But one cannot achieve happiness by wish or by whim. It requires rational respect for the facts of reality, including the facts about our human nature and needs. It requires living by objective principles, including moral integrity and respect for the rights of others. Politically, objectivists advocate laissez-faire capitalism. The problem, this is why I was getting intimidated. The problem is you can't just throw that out there and say, well, this explains everything, because it does not. Mr. A was a character that was seen as a gritty hero, but Ditko didn't really see him that way. Ditko saw him as the idealized hero that really focused on good, and the character would, for example, at times let criminals fall to their death, and just had no problems, basically eliminating evil, and was immune to any kind of corruption. A lot of violent justice, people burning alive and so on. But again, Ditko saw this person as a hero. If you've seen this comic for yourself, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it. Parts of this, kind of the Comics Code Authority sanitized version, became the Question in DC that Ditko also did. But Mr. A has at times been viewed as kind of the most pure Steve Ditko there is. And in many ways, Alan Moore, when he did Watchmen, at least seemed to claim that Rorschach was patterned after Mr. A and Steve Ditko's character. But Steve Ditko would say that, well, he saw some resemblance. Rorschach was insane, whereas Mr. A was an actual hero. It's a bizarre. It's hard to even wander into this, and there's not a straightforward account of what's going on. Steve Ditko, of course, died a couple of years ago. He did pass away at the age of 90. I think it can't be. The key part I think I want you to take away from this video, if you can, is that one of the biggest gifts that Ditko gave comics was that sense of wonderment mixed with reality in his art style that really, I think, set the tone for what Marvel would be in the later 60s and 70s. And it's really stuck with the comic today. It still lives in this world of kind of this wide-eyed wonder. And you look at some of the stuff that Alex Ross does, you look at some of the all parts of this, and there's that sense of a mortal person, a human person, living in a world with unimaginable heroes and wizards and monsters and villains and everything else, and this idea that this bigger than life world could be right around the corner. I think a lot of that's owed to Ditko, and I think that's the part I try and have people. It's always what I mention. What stands out for me with Ditko, the Mr. A and the objectivism and all that kind of stuff. It's a much harder thing to wrap your head around. And again, lots of people have their little slice of stories of kind of Ditko being rude, or Ditko being friendly, or Ditko being extremely introverted, or any of those things. But he gave us a lot in comics, and I think that there's a lot to love about what Ditko did, and it's like all things. There's weirdness to everything. Anyway, what about you? Do you like Steve Ditko? Did you enjoy his stuff? Is he one of the kind of the pillars of the comic industry? I mean, he definitely is for me. I think when people talk about Kirby, and in fact, I think that's one of the things that I frown a little bit as Disney has talked about. A Disney or Marvel Imagineer. They've kind of branded King Kirby as one of the legends. I think Steve Ditko deserves to be up there on the stage as well at that same level, because I think he did a lot to contribute to what Marvel is. But anyway, what do you think? Leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. I hope I muddled through this as best as I could. I don't know why. Ditko's tough for me. But thanks for listening anyway.